So I'm also pleased to introduce our keynote speakers today. It's exciting to have two. Adam Bello and Steve Dembo, co-authors of the book Untangling the Web, 20 Tools to Power Up Your Teaching. Steve Dembo is a pioneer in the field of educational social networking. As Discovery Education's Director of Learning Communities, Social Media Strategy and Innovation, he was instrumental in the explosive growth of the award-winning community, the Discovery Educator Network. Steve is a course designer and adjunct professor for Wilkes University, where he serves as class instructor for the Internet Tools for Teaching course within the Instructional Media Degree Program. He is proud to serve as president of the Skokie-Morton Grove District 69 School Board. Adam Bello is a dedicated educational technologist and father of two young boys. He's the co-founder of Breakout EDU and has served as Presidential Innovation Fellow for the Obama White House. Over the past decade, Adam has created several popular EdTech learning platforms, including EduTecher, EduClipper, and We Learned It. Adam serves as a board member for the EdCamp Foundation, in addition to speaking internationally about education and the power of technology to enhance learning. Steve and Adam will present concurrent sessions in the Pemigewasset room throughout the day, and I definitely recommend attending one if you can. Please join me in giving Adam and Steve a warm welcome as they open the curiosity door.
Thank you.
It's so goofy, it's ridiculous.
It's really goofy.
It's a lot longer.
Yeah.
This seemed a lot shorter when we were just reviewing it ourselves.
Yeah. All right. So how many people know what that's from? Wow. Sorry for the rest of you. But and we'll explain it. It actually, we're big nerds, as you probably got from the last 2 days. But we're big fans of Stranger Things, and we wanted to put together a session, and really it all stemmed from one scene of the first season of Stranger Things, where we have our buddy over here, Dustin, and they're trying to solve some problems. So who do they call? They call their science teacher, who's also their like AV club mentor. And they're trying to get him to do something. He happens to be on a date, and he's like, this isn't a great time, but he's like, hey, why are you keeping the curiosity door closed? And that to us was like, oh, we can make a session out of that. So there you go. If you haven't watched Stranger Things, highly recommended.
It doesn't spoil much, don't worry.
No, yeah. So we're good to go. You know, I'm skipping stuff over here. So, you know, when we talk about innovation, it sometimes is, you know, not exactly what people think. I know Steve talked a little bit about this during his keynote. I talked about it a little bit yesterday as well, that innovation is not necessarily high-tech, technology-based, right? People keep using that word, and I don't think that it's always processed as to what innovation really is.
It's funny, so when we decided we wanted to do a presentation about innovation, we thought, well, one of the things we would try and do is talk to some of the people who've been tasked with it. At this point now, there's a lot of school districts that have a chief innovation officer or a director of innovation or somebody with innovation in their title. I would estimate conservatively we talked to about maybe 20 different, 25, somewhere around there, and interviewed them and talked about, you know, what their process has been, what their experience has been, what has been the quote-unquote innovations in their school districts. And I'll be honest, I was completely floored because I was expecting it to be more technology based, and the reality is most of them were saying it wasn't necessarily about the technology.
Yeah, it's really, you know, the most fascinating thing, I think, talking to those folks, it's process. You know, we all have heard stories about certain projects, and we're like, oh wow, that's really cool, that's amazing. But how did that project get to be? What was left on the cutting room floor, so to speak, of what's going on there? So we're going to try to go behind the scenes a little bit of some of these things and explain what the innovation is and kind of how it's based and how it got there. So one of the people we love to talk to, because she just has a contrarian viewpoint on so many fun things in ed tech, is Audrey Waters, and she's just a brilliant writer and thinker about the space. And she says, we mistakenly associate innovation with invention, and in turn tie it to tech. And I think that really, kind of sums up exactly what this space gets excited about, but sometimes loses meaning and forgets the purpose. So, having a wonderful idea for a project and then having every kid create the same exact project is not innovation. We've alluded to this, I guess, during our speeches as well. One of the prime examples of that was the makey-makey. You guys remember the makey-makey? Makey-makeys are a lot of fun. Don't travel on airplanes with them.
I'm just curious, how many of you have a makey-makey?
Yeah. How many of you have played a banana keyboard on the makey-makey? Right, and that actually sums up the point, because that was the quintessential project. It was what they advertised, it's what they showed everyone.
And it's on the box.
It's on the box. It's freaking awesome. Don't let us say it's not. However, if you get makey-makeys for your classroom, and every single kid is doing the exact same banana, that's not a project, that's a recipe. That's what Chris Lehman says. He's like, look, if you assign it and all the kids give you back the same thing, that's a recipe. And I think that that's really true. There's a lot more that we can do if we allow students to use the tools they have. It was great for Chiquita banana sales, by the way. I mean, their stocks have just been like up and to the right. It's been amazing. But, it's not always about having a brilliant idea. I think sometimes we have to realize that the idea is not about this innovation in a box, right? Innovation can happen in all sorts of different places. It doesn't have to be handed to you, right? Do you remember the old science kits in elementary school where like the science activities would come in this big cardboard box? I don't know if you guys had this. I remember this from my own schooling. And you would go through in lockstep and everyone would do an experiment and they would put in the same amount of salt or the same amount of hydrochloric acid or whatever it was that they were playing with, and everyone got the exact same result. The reality is that is not the curiosity door, right? That is not experimenting.
When I took over as the director of technology at my old school, one of the first things I did was, 'cause mind you, I was a kindergarten teacher, so middle school students, I'll be honest, terrified me. But I went into the middle school classrooms and where we, the computer classrooms, we had the tech labs and all, way before Chromebooks and all that. And when the teacher was done setting up the lesson, I would start asking some of the kids different questions, and most of them would just kind of look at me blankly. Or when they kind of butted their heads up against a wall or had a problem or a bug or something like that, they would sit there, they would raise their hand, and they would keep their hand in the air until the teacher walked around. And what I realized, here's the irony, okay? I taught at a private school in Chicago. Parents were paying about $10,000 to $12,000 per year to send their kids to our school. We had the children of politicians, of businessmen. These were kids that there weren't many on free and reduced lunch, okay? In theory, they were set up for success. These were kids who there was 100% chance they were going off to college. They got good grades. They were going to do well in school. And yet, when I would ask them a question about something that was just 90 degrees to the left of where they were, they were stunned and crippled and couldn't really respond. We had done such a phenomenal job of teaching them how to be successful that they couldn't really think. It was a fascinating process to kind of work through and the conversation to have, and we wound up actually completely tearing apart the curriculum and rebuilding it, because we learned that the more you do, here's how you're going to do if you're going to create a PowerPoint or you're going to do a presentation. Step 1, file new. Step 2, choose theme. Step 3, create 3 bullets. The more that we did that, the more we hamstrung our children. And we prevented them from ever getting to that place where they're going to be thinking, whatever, out of the box and getting creative and so on and so forth.
Yeah, and I think, we've started to see people resurge this idea with, let's do something like a genius hour, right? Let's do something like 20% time, where students are able to kind of take a topic and work on it, right, or explore it. And I think that the 80-20% time model is really interesting. What I personally critique about it is the fact that, if you're saying that you're doing work for 80% of the day, which is your standard workflow and doesn't change much of your classroom, but your kids are engaged actively for the 20% of the day, the math there is a little off for me. Like for my kid to be bored 80% of the day, or just, time on task, and then yet trying to figure out what he's doing for the other 20% is flawed logic. And Steve has a story that kind of exacerbates that.
Well, that's I can just click.
Okay.
That's the irony is nobody's intending to do anything. I don't even want to say harmful. That's not the right word. But every teacher that's trying to do like a genius hour, 20% time and so on, has literally the best of intentions. And yet there is that sort of subtle undercurrent that says, this is your time to be creative during that 20%, and the other 80%, that's my time, and you will follow my instructions. No one's trying to do that, but it just kind of happens. And what that also does is that creates a division in kids' own minds, a separation between the skills they have when they're passionate about something, when they opt into something, and the skills they employ during traditional instruction and classroom time. And I saw this come alive last year through two sort of examples. The first one was the Pinewood Derby. My son, 2 years ago, was old enough to start making his own Pinewood Derby car, and I very much did not want to be that dad that does 90% of the work, lets the kid glue the figure on at the end, and then pretend that the kid did everything, and so on and so forth, right? So I told him, I will help if you need to. I will do like the big saw cuts, because I didn't want my kids to wind up being called Stumpy for the rest of his life, you know what I mean? So, so I did that. Every other thing on that car, he did himself. He weighed it all. He figured out how many bricks he could use. He glued everything on. He painted everything on. 100% of the work, besides 2 cuts on the saw, he did himself. And he was incredibly excited. In hindsight, maybe I should have helped a little bit more, because one of the things he did himself was hammer in the wheels. And I don't know if you know anything about Pinewood Derby cars, but one of the things you're trying to get them to do is go straight, right, down the track. Because if it curves off, it's just going to rub against the center rail and slow down. His did not exactly go straight. He came in dead last every heat. He did win for like most creative car, yay, you know. We all know what that award means, right? That said, that night, he looked a little bummed. And I said, well, why are you bummed? He goes, well, I really thought my car was going to be faster. Now, mind you, you saw what his car looked like, right? A block of wood was more aerodynamic, okay? I said, so you thought it was going to do better, you thought it was going to be faster. What did you do to make your car be faster? And he looked at me like I was an idiot, because he didn't even know that was an option, that was something that you chose to do. That was something that was done deliberately. So we pulled up the iPad, we'd do a Google search for fast Pinewood Derby cars, and then you start seeing stuff like this, right? And so then all of a sudden he starts digging in, and he's looking at all these kids who are talking about how they got their car to come in first, and he's looking at different designs, and he's learning about aerodynamics, and he's learning about friction, and he's learning about where to place weights on the car. And literally for almost an entire year, every Sunday before Sunday school, he would wake up, jump on YouTube, and start researching Pinewood Derby cars, and start planning out in his mind what he's going to do different the following year. And then when we actually got the car, he knew exactly what kind of design he wanted. He knew exactly how he wanted the weights to be, what he needed to do, and how he was going to be testing it, and how things were going to be different. And the best part about it all, it paid off. He got first in his den, which is awesome, right? He put the time in, he was passionate about it, he found every piece of information he could find on the interwebs, and then applied it, and it paid off. Yay. In contrast, right around April of last year, he was in 4th grade, and he comes home and says, I've got a science test tomorrow. And I said, all right, I'll quiz you, we'll go through it, get you prepared. And I said, do you have anything specifically you're supposed to study? He goes, yeah, I have a study guide. And he breaks out a piece of paper that looks basically like this. And he's studying the parts of the tree, and it says leaves, and it says trunk, and then it says roots, and underneath roots there's a whole bunch of information. This is a photo. I forgot to take a picture of it before he threw it out. But there's a whole bunch of information about roots. And I said, so are you supposed to study all of these? He goes, yeah. I said, well, why isn't there any information about leaves or trunk? He goes, well, I spent so much time drawing the picture of the tree that I didn't have time to write down all the other stuff off the board. All right, fine, typical, I get that. So I asked him, so what are you going to study about leaves and trunk? He goes, well, I'll just study the roots part and wing the rest. I said, well, I mean, could we find information about leaves and trunk? Could you just, we'll research it and learn? He goes, no, well, I don't know exactly what the teacher wants me to learn about those. Now, just think about the difference. Same kid, but when it was self-directed, when it was something that he was passionate, when he felt a sense of ownership, he dug in and he learned all the things that he didn't need to know and that he did need to know and filtered it out and figured it out and made it happen. And yet with this, he doesn't feel a sense of ownership, he didn't feel passionate about it, and he didn't care enough. There was this complete disconnect between the skill set that he had in the outside world versus the skill set that he employs on the inside world. Somehow or another, real world learning and school learning don't necessarily intersect. And very often we talk about that school learning, the things that happen inside school should have a real world impact. Well, I would also say it goes the other direction. The skills and the passion that kids have when they're excited about something, when it's something individual to them, when it's something that they're into themselves on the outside world, we need to take those skills and make sure they're applying them inside the classroom as well. We've got to find that intersection between there. All too often, there's this major disconnect. The kids have the skills, we have the projects we want them to apply them to, and yet somehow or another those two things don't always connect. You see what I mean? That's where we need to change the mindset. It has nothing to do with technology. It's mindset. It's this vision piece, you know what I mean? It's this philosophy piece, and that's what we need to shift. You know, I found online when I was doing some research for this project, we found this article that we both agreed represented some of the things that we want for our kids going into the 21st century. You know, you call it 21st century skills. If you don't want to sold old-fashioned or something like that, you call it future-forward learning now. Same darn thing, okay? We found this article that talked about 7 principles for future-forward learning. Now, we'll walk through these. You just tell me, we can see all of you. Just nod your heads if you agree that this is something that you believe is something that we should be emphasizing for our students in our classrooms and so on, okay? That children should be able to construct their own learning. That this isn't just something that should be given to them and then they study, but they're actually getting hands-on and assembling it and discovering it and piecing it together gives them that sense of ownership, and it's something that we want for kids. You want?
Sure. So children should be able to understand the world through interactions with others. Collaboration, communication, actually teamwork. Yeah, something we want for kids, probably. Some of you are like, nope. Nope, not at all. All right, fair enough.
Children are natural communicators. When they learn something, they want to share it. I can tell you, I've been to more than one teacher-parent conference where I get the exact same feedback. Your son is very exuberant about sharing the things he's learned, which is teacher talk we all know for he won't shut up, and I get that, okay? But the point is, students want to share the things that they've learned, and they want to share it in a variety of different ways. You know what I mean? They get excited about it, they get passionate about it, they want to put it into words, and they want to share it with anyone and everyone.
Yeah, and then the environment has an actual impact on the learning. That the way you set up your classroom or the school, whether it be the structure of the room itself or just the ethos in the room, it actually makes a difference for those kids. Okay.
Yeah. The role of the teacher is to be a mentor and to be a guide, not to be that sole repository of information, but to put kids on the right track so they can have self-discovery, so that they can dig deeper, reach farther, and so on, to when they get off task, to put them back on task, but not necessarily be the hub, not necessarily be the center of the classroom, to put that locus of control back on the students so they can keep applying that when they move on from that one specific classroom as well, right? We want our students to take ownership of their own learning, and the teacher is the one who kind of fosters that and makes it happen.
Yeah, and we also want kids to document their learning in the best form of assessment. It's not just about taking multiple choice tests, it's about creating either a digital portfolio or sharing some sort of student body of work that they can get respective feedback on.
Yeah, and that there are hundreds.
Yeah, there's lots of ways to do this.
What?
I was gonna say, there's lots of ways to do this. I mean,
Yeah. Hundreds of ways for children to share what they've learned. This is something that we've talked about over the last few days. It's not just an essay, it's not just a diorama, but it could be that interpretive dance. It could. I actually had a teacher last night drop me a message and said that she challenged her students to not just complete an assignment about something they were reading, but actually do it in the spirit of what that assignment was. And she said one of her students turned in their assignment in Morse code. How awesome is that? And how awful. You know what I mean? I don't know if you could just use Google goggles to translate that, you know what I mean? But at the same time, especially in the digital era, I mean, we have so many different options for our students to demonstrate their knowledge and understanding. Yeah. Yeah, now the irony is, first of all, just nod your head. You agree with those 7 principles? Does that seem like about what we want to see for our classrooms and our kids and so? Yeah, most people would tend to agree with it. What's interesting is we've kind of framed this as, you know, future forward per se, but this actually, those 7 principles are an approach to early childhood. Any kindergarten teachers in the class, did you recognize what this was? What is it? Do you remember what it's called? This is an approach to kindergarten called the Reggio Emilia. Oh, you already have it up?
I already have it
screen?
up. I was going to be like, hint, hint.
He's got the clicker, can you tell? Yeah. The Reggio Emilia approach. This is an approach that came out of Reggio Emilia, Italy in 1946. And basically the way the approach works is kids come into the classroom, there is nothing on the walls, there is nothing on the tables, there is nothing on the counters, and the teacher sits down and says, so what do you want to learn? And they ask the kids what they're interested in. And it's not to say they don't have a curriculum, that's not to say they don't have goals, that's not to say they don't have things they want to accomplish by the end of the school year, but they let everything be driven through what the kids want to do. It's an old approach, but it's really future forward at the same time. It's sort of, in a sense, a more pervasive version, a more holistic version of project-based learning and so on. And they do everything from the classroom generates and comes from what the kids are passionate about. And if we really want to look to some of what the future forward ideas are, some of the best future forward ideas are from 50, 60 years ago. Good pedagogy just happens to be good pedagogy, right? It works.
So we look at this and we're like, all right, let's explore these principles a little bit more. How does it fit into our modern classrooms? One is making learning open-ended, right? Like actually giving students the ability to kind of create their own path and build projects that are not so makey-esque, right? Where it's not like, here's a banana, here's some Play-Doh, here's a wire, have fun. This is really allowing them to explore and build projects that are speaking to their interests and allowing them to explore what they're interested in as well.
You need to focus on the concepts above the facts. And this is something we've talked about for a long time. I mean, it's nothing new, especially when you talk about the Google generation and being able to just look up a state capital and so on and so forth. But at the same time, you know, I just was having a conversation with somebody about math homework, and they were saying about how much they were irked by the idea of forcing kids to always show their work. My kids' homework actually doesn't say show your work anymore. It says explain your reasoning. And that's a very different thing. And at first, I kind of just let that one slide. I just let them write almost anything down. But as I've done my homework with the kids, I realized there's actually something very valuable about just having them step back and really think about not just the answer that they got, why did they get that answer in that way? Why did they choose to mix those numbers in that particular manner? And when he actually took the time to step back and explain his reasoning, he wound up being more deliberate. He stopped making as many careless errors. He stopped flipping things around. You know what I mean? We really need to make sure that we really give our students that chance to kind of step back and think critically about what they're doing and the way that they're doing it and why they're doing it that way.
And I think with that, we want them to be creative. We want an emphasis on creativity, and that doesn't mean that every kid has to make this amazing, elaborate diorama. The idea there is to think creatively, to explain ideas in a different manner. And I think that that's something that we've lost. A lot of times we think about creativity as like time spent in the craft store building something and trying to have the parents. I love that, because I'm telling you, my kids come home with projects, I'm like, oh my God, I went to 3rd grade. I don't have to do this. Like, this is crazy. But you know, like my kids, quick aside, my kids in a talented and gifted program, in the beginning of the year, they have this big project. And so they take pictures of all the projects. And my wife and I have this little fun activity, which is like, parent did it, parent did it, parent did it, kid did it. And my kid brought his project home the first day, whereas the good ones were asked to be kept in school for like the showcase. And I was like, well, that's what happens when you let your kid actually do the projects themselves. Anyway, we want that. We want to focus on creativity, allowing them to really explore ideas differently.
And we want our kids to question everything. And I do mean everything. And this is, I'll be the first to admit it. Once you flip this switch on a kid, it kind of makes your life it makes life harder because they will push back on every norm, on every status quo and all that. But that's what we want our kids to do, especially if we want our kids to be inventive. If we want our kids to, to actually solving real world problems, the way you solve real world problems is first you start questioning why things are the way they are. And there are so many things that we take for granted. I'll give you one concrete example of this related to the 3D printer. And I was talking to somebody about this just the other day. We have a bunch of coffee mugs. We have too many coffee mugs. They're spilling out of our cabinet, right? So, but my wife, every single one of them has a cute little phrase on it, so we can't throw any of them away, okay? This isn't being live streamed, is it? No one tweet that out, please, okay? I'm just saying. So I told my wife we could put like hooks underneath the cabinet, right? And we could just print them out on the 3D printer. Now that's a very different thing than going into Best Buy, or not Best Buy, like Ace Hardware or so, the hardware store, because normally when you go into the hardware store and you're going to buy hooks, you either choose black, silver, or white, right? And you choose one of the ones that are on the shelf. You've got 5 different choices. You pick the one that looks good, and then you put it up. In this instance, it could literally be anything. So I asked my son, I said, so what should our hooks look like? And at first, the first thing he said were eagle's claws. Eagle's claws, that's what he wanted. He wanted an eagle claw to be holding up our coffee mug. I mean, and I said, well, that's probably not what we want. He goes, well, why not? You know what I mean? All of a sudden, we were talking about emphasizing creativity, and he's questioning the norms. Does it have to be a standard hook shape? No, it could be just about anything, right? And by the way, that's a tough one to figure out then. I mean, should it, just a hook? Should it be modern? Should it be contemporary? Should it be an eagle's claw? Should it be a dragon's claw? What's the difference between an eagle's claw and a dragon's claw? You know what I mean? And getting into that, and then of course, what color should they be? Glow in the dark and so on. It's a very different process than silver, black, or white, right? Well, it's the same sort of thing with him about just about everything now. Whenever anything doesn't work in our house, he starts trying to figure out whether it's broken or whether something better hasn't been invented yet. Now think about that. That's a very different mindset. And what if we applied that same concept inside the classrooms, to our lessons, to our projects, to everything? Are we doing it because that's the way we've done it, or are we doing it because that's the best way to do it? The other thing that I keep thinking about when we talk about questioning everything, I'll just one more real quick one and then I'll move on. Do any of you teach early, like first, second grade, kindergarten, first grade, or you've seen first and second grade classrooms, right? You're familiar with first and second, the kids about this tall? Anyway, they all have in the front of the room a calendar chart. And the calendar chart has a big piece of calendar that the month thing that's been laminated, and then it has 30 individual little cards that go into it. And I'm sure you know exactly what I'm talking about, because every single classroom in our country has the exact same calendar chart and has had the exact same calendar chart for the last 20 years, because that's what they sell in school specialty, and and so on and so forth. That we all order from the same place, and it hasn't changed. Is that the best calendar chart we could have? With the maker movement now, and with cheap screens and electronics and doohickeys and so on and so forth, could we make a better calendar chart? I don't know whether we could or not, but I'd love somebody to be thinking about it and just questioning it once and just pushing back on simple things like that, on the norms. I guarantee you, somebody in this room is percolating on that. There's $1 million idea right there. Run with it, or give it to your kids and let them run with it. But I want the kids to question it. I want the kids to question literally everything in our classrooms and our lessons.
All right, I'm already working on that in my head, so don't anyone take this stuff. No, I'm just kidding. I think that the other piece of it is reflection. And it's often given short shrift because in schools, traditionally, the assignment gets turned in and it's over. When it gets turned back, you've given an assessment, whether it be a grade or an essay, and that's the end of it. For our students to think about, and when Steve's talking about his son, if you're going to print out a dragon claw, why might not that be a good idea? Well, it might be too sharp. All right, well, what other ideas can you do? Reflect on what it is that you've done, or reflect on the idea and try to see it past the stage of completion. And, yeah, go ahead.
No, I was going to actually go. Tom Murray had this interesting article about 3D printers, why just having a 3D printer doesn't mean your classroom is innovative. And he's right. I mean, just in terms of the technology itself doesn't necessarily move the needle. It doesn't change the conference. It's how you wind up using it. And there is something very innovative about 3D printing, but it isn't necessarily just simply having a 3D printer and spitting things out on it. It's the process. It's what it allows. It's what it unlocks. It's that whole the design thinking and all that. That's what winds up being the innovation, not the printer itself. Now, I will say this, though. It does allow you to try and change the dynamic in some ways. That's the beauty of technology. And even if you just make small shifts by taking something that's traditional, pushing back on it, and doing it in a different way, that's still at least small steps in the right direction on that innovation timeline, if you will. Mark Prensky actually talks about this, about moving from one place to another and getting it to a new way. Sometimes even literally just doing what you were doing before in new and creative ways is enough. Taking the old volcano project and letting kids, instead of building it using paper mache and such, but doing it in Minecraft, that's a great alternative. Or making use of something called Hyperduino that Roger Wagner invented. This is an Arduino type thing, and what it does is it basically has sensors. So you've got this little paper volcano here, and the communication goes back both ways. When you click on the base of the volcano, it'll launch a video that will start talking about how a volcano erupts and so on and so forth. You click somewhere else on the volcano, it'll tell you different information. But also, while that video is playing, at specific time codes in the video, it will actually light up things on the paper volcano to show you, to actually demonstrate it physically in front of you. It's a digital, physical, sort of hybrid sort of thing. That's the kind of stuff that we can do now. The barriers to entry are very, very, very low. You know what I mean? So it's just these subtle little shifts, and ideally integrating it across multiple subjects. This next one is a project that was done in the art class in conjunction with the language arts teacher. And this was a 3D printing project. Basically, they got vocabulary words. Each student got 3 vocabulary words, and then they had to design from scratch a superhero that would embody those 3 characteristics. And then they put them all up into a gallery, and people had to walk around the gallery and try and guess, looking at that superhero, what are the 3 characteristics that describe that hero, and try and figure it out. Is that an art project? Is it a language arts project? It's a little bit of each. You know what I mean? And it's not just the fact that the 3D printer allows you to make that come alive. You could have done it in clay. You could have done something else. The innovation is the combination of it. That's what it is. The creativity involved, the open-endedness, the allowing the students to kind of express themselves in creative and diverse ways and so on. That's where the shift is. It's not just the overt and the shiny object in the corner of the room.
Speaking of the shiny object in the corner of the room, these are our shiny desks in a traditional classroom setting. You know, when you walk in at the beginning of the year, a lot of classrooms look something like this. We are not advocating to change every piece of furniture. What makes a startup culture or any of these quote-unquote innovative spaces better is not high-tech everything. We don't want kids with touch tablet tables. And I mean, that would be cool, but like, the idea is not to think about, oh, I want a $650 plastic wobble seat for every kid. Like, the logic is, this is a startup, a WeWork space. You know, if you look at it, people are sitting together in small groups. You're actually, yes, there's a computer in front of you, but you could actively like talk to your neighbor. The entire board, right, is this idea chart. It's just idea paint. It's relatively inexpensive to do this type of a setup in a space. Forget the computers are even there. It is a collaborative space. You sit together, you work on a giant whiteboard wall or a giant chalkboard together, and there's spaces to do that. I think that's really interesting. And Bob Dylan talks about this in his, but not this Bob Dylan, the other Bob Dylan. So Bob talks about this in a book that he wrote called The Space, and it's a really, really interesting book that focuses on learning spaces. He says, we're not decorating learning spaces, we're designing them to amplify the learning. So in his book, he lists a couple of characteristics that I think that all spaces really should look at. Too much visual stimulation has an inverse effect. So the more colorful, the more elaborate decorations you might be doing, more harm than good. Curiosity and movement are linked. Don't restrict either of those. Tiny details like color and light and sound impact learning. How do you set up a room that has a quiet area? How do you set up a room that has soft lighting that allows kids to read without being harsh on their eyes? I personally remember in like 4th or 5th grade, I had one classroom where the lights were so harsh, I remember like not being able to really focus on the paper. And I know that that's, in hindsight, I'm like, wow, that's really an amazing point. Visible learning is infectious. People doing things, being visibly engaged, being visually engaged is really important. And physical brainstorming and mind mapping is stimulating more than digital. So doing things physically, it's funny to think about that. I mean, I think about it, obviously my main gig is Breakout EDU. And just thinking back of like how something that is so physically based is so different and has such appeal, because sitting in rows all day and sitting in a classroom all day where you're staring forward, even if the content delivery is great, even if the projects are engaging, you still have this moment where you can get up and actually interact. And the last point he makes is that educators are impacted by the environment also. And I think you guys know that, and we try to make our spaces as comfortable and inviting both for us as well as our students, but it has a real impact on the teaching. So these are some spaces that we've seen, and note the fact that there's primary color furniture, but it doesn't have to be that way. The reality is just putting kids together, facing each other, allowing them to have conversation spaces is really important. When I go into I won't throw anyone under the bus, but one of my kids' teachers has the kids set up in rows and they're individually spaced, and you could just tell that no one talks to their neighbor in that class without getting on the red list, In the other class, they're in clumps of 6 all facing in, and she doesn't even have like a big teacher desk in the front. She has a little circular desk where the kids meet with her privately for conferences off on the side. And it's just that dichotomy of same exact furniture, the same desks, just how they organize it.
I just want to point out, so in our school district right now, we're actually in the middle of a capital campaign. We're doing some construction. One of the things we're talking about is redoing the furniture in some of our classrooms. So we actually have 2 classrooms right now where some of the furniture providers are, they're putting the furniture in so that we could try it out, and then after a couple months, they're swapping it all out and trying something different. And my son's teacher from last year is in one of those classrooms, and I saw her in the hall, and I asked her, so how are things going? She goes, yeah, ironically, I had them put all my old furniture back in. And I said, well, why? And she goes, well, what's funny is I actually really like the dynamic of moving the classroom around and making it more fluid, and I'm still doing that. But I actually found it was easy for my kids to just pick up the desks and move them around when we wanted to than to have these fancy ones with wheels that only did it like this and so on and so forth. The old furniture actually worked better. She just flipped the mindset. You know what I mean? It's not necessarily just simply about getting the bouncy seat or the yoga ball or whatever it is, or the chair that wobbles and so on and so forth. For some kids, yeah, maybe that works or something, but at the same time, it's not necessarily specifically about the shape of the desk. It's about how you set up the environment and the mindset and the classroom dynamic more than anything else.
A teacher that does some really interesting stuff we want to talk about is a friend of ours, Don Wettrick. So Don teaches at a school, Noblesville, Indiana, and he has this quote. He talks about, he originally was doing work with Genius Hour, but then he kind of wanted to build it further, so he really is focusing on innovation. He's like the director of innovation for his high school. And he has a quote, he says, when you lead off the first day with rules and regulations, you're creating a culture of limitations. And if you talk to Don, as we had the opportunity to, you learn a lot about his class and what he does. He has an innovation class. So of course we're like, okay, well what does that look like? What do you do in an innovation class? And he says the kids come in and they're tasked with creating companies and products, and they have to create equity stakes for their businesses, and they fight over who's the founding partners and who does the ideas and who does the work. His role as a teacher is simply to be a project manager. He gets involved when he has to. He stays on top of it as the kids go and bounce off ideas. But he brings in experts to be their quote-unquote mentors and teachers. And he's brought in people like Seth Godin or Daniel Pink. And he's even had folks like the Shark Tank crew come in and give them advice. Learning in that is not simulation. And that's what I loved about this, is that he really takes the approach that they start with a 2-week process of them coming up with the idea, and then they execute. And yes, they can pivot, and yes, they can change, but they have to present to him business plans. They have to present to him plans on going through and doing these projects. So that all sounds great, but I was like, give me some example. Like, that sounds awesome. How does it work? Like, how does it actually go through? So he's explaining to me, I saw him recently, and he was explaining to me that one of the kids decided that they wanted to have a class in the school that was not about innovation, but that was about esports. And I said, a club?
Make sure you explain what esports are.
Do you know what esports is? So esports is competitive professional video game playing, computer games. And so Don created a full class on the sport esports. It is not a club. It is an actual class. Students come in and they play video games. I said, wait, they all take turns playing video games? He's like, no, they have teams. They have teams and they train, and they're going to have a varsity league, which is in addition to the class. This is the type of guy we're talking about here, right? I just wanted to set this frame for you. And they're doing it. They're the first high school in America that has a varsity esports league. And I went in, this is a picture of their lab. And the kids obviously have academics. It's not like they only go to school to play video games, but there is a block of time where they are creating these video game teams and competing nationally. The reason they do it, by the way, is because esports players can be paid up to $2 million in scholarships and sponsorships at the age of 16 and 17. So, other projects that are innovative, not video game based, he talked about a 16-year-old and a 17-year-old that started a business called Storybook Factory.
A place
and I'll just kind of chat over it. They basically created their own version of a full online reading store where students would have access to read and write their own stories. It's kind of like Raz Kids meets Starfall meets a bunch of other stuff, but it's created by these 16 and 17-year-old kids as their business. And they launched it, and they're working on a second version, and then they're going out for funding. I mean, it's really a pretty amazing story to think about kids doing this stuff. But that's building a website. One of the other examples he gave us was this. There was a kid who wanted to do something with the 3D printer. The problem he was trying to solve is that he was using this muscle milk stuff, and he was always spilling it onto the floor of the gym. And the people in the school would get mad because the dust of the powder of the whatever, the mix of the milk, muscle milk, was getting all over the place. So he creates this funnel, right? He creates and 3D prints and is patenting this funnel. And in doing so, a company got very interested in using this quote unquote technology, this idea, and it was not muscle milk, it was actually Infamil. Because if you're a parent, or if you know parents that have mixed bottle formula, you get that stuff everywhere. So they're actually looking to make this the Infamil bottle strainer thing from this 16-year-old's design in Don's class, which I thought was awesome.
Is that genius, though? Questioning something that everyone just takes as status quo. The fact that you have to be somewhat of a chemistry major or have nerves of steel to get the Enfamil from that container into the bottle without spilling any of it. And I believe it's around like $300 per ounce, right? Give or take. We've all done it, right? We've all been there. That's what we're talking about. We're talking about this, questioning everything and trying to solve the real world problems. We want our kids to be looking at that and saying, well, that's kind of, that's a problem, that people are having trouble getting it from here to there, or not spilling the muscle milk all over the floor and so on. And also taking it that second step and saying, can I solve it? How could it be solved? What could be a way to figure out how to make it happen? And then what's the process you take to go from that idea into implementation, into iteration, revision, and ultimately getting it into the market? That's what we want, isn't it? One of my favorite new products is this, I saw it at CES this past year. It is a hairbrush, and I'm not exaggerating when I say this is one of my favorite things in the whole wide world. It is a Bluetooth connected hairbrush. Now I know you're all thinking, where can I buy such a wonderful thing, right? And it's only like $200. It's not bad, okay? I know, it's a bargain, right? You might want to buy two. But here's the interesting thing. What it does is it actually measures the health of your hair while you're brushing it, and whether your hair is getting healthier or getting worse, whether you're taking care of it or not. It measures every stroke that you do, but it also tries to give your hair a score as to how healthy it actually is. Now, how on earth does the brush know how healthy your hair is? Any ideas? Whether it's falling out or not. Yeah, but how does the brush know whether it's falling out or not? What? Just scans it. So it could have some sort of a scanner, a light scanner that measures. That could probably work, but that technology would probably make it from $200 to like $400. It's a little bit more expensive, right? I've heard some people say maybe put sensors in every bristle, but there's a lot of bristles on the brush, right? And they're very, very. You know how it actually does it? It has a microphone in the center of the brush. And think about this. When you got a lot of split ends and your hair's all tangled and you brush through your hair, it makes a very different sound than when your hair is healthy and you pull a brush through it. I know some of you guys don't understand what that means. Okay, I'll explain. No, I'm just kidding. It's fascinating. That level of ingenuity of just trying to figure out, is there a way that we could assign a score and determine how healthy your hair is, and trying to figure out how could we do it with light? Could we do it with sound? Like, that level of ingenuity is what we want our kids to do. And we want them to try each one of those different methods and figure out which one is going to be best. That iteration part is an absolutely critical part of the process. And that's where I think so many classrooms go wrong, especially when we talk about technologies like a 3D printer. If you have a 3D printer and your students spend 2 weeks in Tinkercad creating their design, and then over winter break or in the evenings, the teacher prints out all 25 of them and then hands it to them, that's an artifact. There's no invention there. They need to have the chance to look at that and say, oh, that's not what I thought it was going to be, and then to make adjustments. This is what I did with my son. Okay? My teacher, once again, the same teacher, I keep talking about that same teacher. She's wonderful. She had a great idea. When the 3D spinners were coming around, the fidget spinners were coming around, she said, anyone in our class can use a fidget spinner. You can use it openly. You can put it on your desk and do whatever you want with it under one condition: make it. Can't just walk into Walgreens and buy one. You have to make it yourself. So some kids were putting it together with Legos, some kids were gluing things together, some kids were using coins and gluing them onto a bearing, some kids were going into the hardware store and making their own. So we had the 3D printer at home, so my son decided to 3D print his own fidget spinner, his own design. This is what it looked like. Now, we affectionately nicknamed it the Surprised Elmo. Is that what it looks like? Doesn't spin well. When you spin it, it kind of goes wah, 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 you know what I mean? It doesn't, and I actually asked him, this is one of my favorite, I asked him, why doesn't it spin very well? And he thought about it for a minute and gave him he said, well, it's not symmetrical, Daddy. I said, oh, that's a great use of your math word. I didn't have the heart to tell him that, well, if you draw the line this way, yes, it is perfectly symmetrical, but what he meant was balanced. I got it, anyway, so, but then he went back to the drawing board. He sat down and thought about what wasn't right, what could he fix, how could he do it differently, make it better, how could he make it spin longer, what kind of shape, and so on. And then he started making much, much better designs. And he started selling them too, to friends, family, adults, people on the street. We literally went to a music festival where we were camping out for 3 days, and one morning, me and my wife are still sleeping in the tent, and we hear my son yelling. I race out of the tent. He had flipped over one of our bins, put out about 10 fidget spinners, and was hawking them to the hippies who were coming back from that night's partying. And I'm not exaggerating. And he had his sister, a 6-year-old, sitting in the chair next to him, and his sales line was, if someone please buy these fidget spinners, I need to put my sister through college. He sold $65 in fidget spinners in about 20 minutes. Yeah, it was pretty awesome. But the point is, the very first one they made wasn't the right one, and it never is. They need to be able to do it, and then do it again, and then do it again, and then do it again. And that's when they start to get good at it. That's when they get to really start putting the skills into practice. There's a great process for this called the design thinking process. The people who came up with this whole process actually have a guidebook specifically for educators. It is so worth downloading and reading through, and it can be used for everything from 3D printing and solving small little problems inside your classroom, as well as solving big giant problems in your school district, like advisory isn't working out, how could we do things differently? Lunch is too short, how can we rearrange our schedule to make it fit? It is a phenomenal process that if you aren't familiar with, you owe it to yourself to at least download it and check it out. And once you start employing these sorts of ideas and empowering kids to start thinking along these lines, then you never know what they're going to come up with. One of the kids in our district, a girl named Lily, came up with a brilliant, she actually, a real world problem. Her grandfather had Parkinson's disease, and every time he put down a cup on the table, he would knock it over. And she said, well, look around the room right now. Every single cup has almost exactly the same base, a circular base. Some of them are actually shaped so they're almost like conic, which means the center of gravity is so high up, they're almost designed to tip over, right? Even the standard Starbucks cup, the smallest point on it is the base of it itself, right? So she's just said, does it have to be that way? What's really, 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 really sturdy? And you know what she came up with? That tripod, that camera is not going to tip over because of the way that it is laid out. And she said, could we just build a cup around that design? And she invented something called the Kangaroo Cup that has 3 legs on it. Interestingly enough, because the cup part itself doesn't actually touch the table, you never need a coaster for it either. Hot or cold, it just sits above the table, and it has these legs. So almost any way you put that down, it stays upright. Turns out, it's great for grandparents with Parkinson's. It's also great for parents that are transitioning from a sippy cup to a regular cup and are tired of cleaning up the kitchen. You know what I mean? So she actually put up on Kickstarter, raised around $60,000 on Kickstarter. It's now available on Amazon if you want to order it yourself. Yeah, she's run into some issues with manufacturing in China and shipping this. She's learned a lot of lessons. But all this comes from that mindset that we were talking about. Those principles of future forward learning, that emphasizing the creativity, of pushing back on everything, of reflecting and questioning and so on and so forth. That's the mindset. Now, once you have that mindset, then you can take that and shift it to making use of the technology that you have at hand. The reality is that idea, that curiosity, and so on, there's no way for us to test that in our school system, and yet it is one of the most critical things that we can foster inside our students. It's what we want for, if you ask parents what they want for their kids, they won't say, I want my kid to do better on the PARCC test. That's not what they're going to say. They want their kids to be empowered, to be creative, and to be passionate. There are a lot of ways that schools are trying to address this. Some schools are adopting that same sort of philosophy and pushing back on the norms, the things we take for granted, that we take as status quo. For example, does a school need a building? Does it need a building? This is something called the Think Global School. They don't have a school. They have lessons, they have classes, they have expectations, they have standards, they have tests, they have everything else that goes along with the schooling process. They just don't have a building. Instead, they go to Austria, and they go to China, and they go to Japan, and they go to Spain, and they go to Oman and Costa Rica, and they find places to host them that will take them in, and they do their classes there, and they move around throughout the year. What an amazing experience, right? And just think about that. Does it have to be bound to a single area? I mean, yes, it's sort of like this whole idea of a summer abroad, but extending that over to the year. And think about all the other things the kids learn along the way. What a beautiful sort of experience. Another one that I love is this new school called they call themselves string theory schools. And the main philosophy is we want to take we think project-based learning is a good idea, but we don't want it just to be for one project. We want their entire school experience to be like that. So the students actually, in K through 4, they get a lot of instruction in fine arts and performing arts and foreign languages and science. And then when they get into middle school, they choose a major. They select a major, and every single day they spend 90 minutes of their day in that major. Some of the majors include dance, STEM, music, theater, TV, writing, design, communications, and so on. Now that doesn't mean they take time away from science and social studies and reading. It just means sometimes your math project is revolved around calculating bit rates for live streaming. Do you see what I mean? It's the application of it based on what they're passionate about. It's the same similar sort of idea to that Reggio Emilia project, approach that we were talking about before, but it's making it pervasive. And then when they get into secondary school, yes, they have college prep, honors, AP coursework, and so on and so forth, but they still focus in on their major. By the time they graduate high school, they have spent about 6 or 7 years diving deeply into the things that they are passionate about. Getting some real experience, not just surface level, not just one project. They can own it.
So, we talk about this a lot, and one of our friends is Chris Lehman, and Chris founded the Science Leadership Academy in Philadelphia and has since opened up several arms of schools that are built around innovative processes and thinking. But he said, you're not going to new school your way out of the problem that you have with school. That, one of the things that they do is they have student-directed focus points, student-directed courses, meaning that if you go to social studies, the students decide that they want to talk about how did 9/11 happen? How did whatever event occur? And the entire focus of the school year of that course is through that lens. Is having students dissect that problem. And again, they hit the standards, they talk about content, they build it around their curiosity, whether it be a cultural event or whether it be something that's going on in the news currently. And that, to me, makes school, A, more valid, and what you study and learn, it really becomes more impactful. So one of the other schools that I had the pleasure of visiting, a couple of these, one is in Albany, it's Tech Valley High. And what I found fascinating about the school is it's called Tech Valley, but when I went there, I was expecting everyone to have like one-to-one iPads and MacBooks and all sorts of stuff. They had like old Dells, and they had like, they had technology, but the technology never felt like it was a slap in the face of like, look, we have technology. It was just there. And one of the things I really liked about it is that the school also everything focused on a student chosen direction. One of the year that I went there, is they were looking at the Hudson River outside, and the question the students had is, why is the Hudson River so dirty? And so everything that they studied that year, both the math and the science and the history, was all focused on, why is the Hudson River so dirty? And they hit all their standards. And I actually said to them at one point, I was like, wait, do you hit all the standards? It's like, they probably get 80%, but if you look at their test scores, they do just as well as kids that go in other schools. We might not get every single thing, but the reality is everything we teach, they actively remember. And everything we teach, they have a connection to. One of the other, as a quick aside, the school does something else that's really interesting. They give their kids mandatory internships from 9th grade through 12th grade. A month of internship. I was like, that's really interesting. 9th graders, this was a couple years ago, 9th grader was obsessed with CSI, the show. And she thought she wanted to be a crime scene investigator, because it looks so much fun on TV. So she interned at the morgue through the school. Let's just say she did not want to work as a CSI agent anymore. Another kid wanted to be a stand-up comic. So his internship was at a stand-up comedy, following these comedians. Also, chose not to be a stand-up comic. I would love 4 do-overs for careers, before you get out of high school. I love that concept.
Now, in terms of actually, we're talking a lot about trying to change vision and so on and so forth. We tried to find different approaches that actually worked or that were valid. How do you get from here to there? We just had Chris Lehman saying, new schools are wonderful, string theory, global schools, those are great. But the reality is we have existing school districts, we have existing schemes. So how do we move the needle? How do we move along that path? Doing things like the 20% time or wet tricks class and having an isolated class along those lines, or doing innovative projects, those things are wonderful. But so long as you keep in mind what they actually accomplish, they move you from here to here. But in isolation, they're not going to get the whole district over to here. So how do you make that sort of a shift? One of the ways is this thing called deeper planning. Deeper learning. Deeper learning is a phenomenal approach to kind of just fostering these conversations and moving an entire district from here over to here. And it's absolutely fascinating. It's a 4-phase process where one of the first things you do is you kind of just come to some consensus about what we believe we want for kids, and then stepping back and reflecting, what are we actually doing? And does it accomplish the things that we want them to do? But just not pointing fingers, not being critical, but thinking critically, which is different, right? And then once you've done that, going through all these different activities, trying to figure out what our next steps are going to be. They have so many phenomenal rubrics and conversations and activities. It's even if you're not going to do this completely and go through it from beginning to end with the entire district and school board members and parents and so on and so forth, just downloading and looking through it and using some of these ideas as a launching point for conversations is incredibly worthwhile in my opinion. Now, what's also interesting is when you break down the whole thing is around 120, 150 pages, somewhere around there. I actually looked at how many pages each section of it was. Phase 2 was 59% of the entire process. You know what phase 2 is? Talking about and reflecting on what we're doing and what we want. It's that conversation. It's coming to consensus. It's changing our vision and figuring out where we really do want to be. It's that kind of stuff. And what I also love about this is it talks about it very high level, but it also talks about it very concretely. They have 8 different schools that have gone through this type of process and come out on the other side and are better for it. And throughout the entire book, at every step along the way, they have examples from those schools of what that specific process, that specific activity looked like in their school. And the best part about it is they're all completely different. When this school went through it, they got this result, and this is what they got out of it. When this school went through it, they got something completely different out of it. And what it really emphasizes is there is no one right way. There is no one right path. It's the activity and the process of going through this and having these conversations that is in itself the right path. Right? So you'll be able to see specific examples from each one of these people. I told you we talked to like 20 or 25 people that all have innovation in their title. The one person that I can point to that I think honestly has got the best results, is farthest along, is that is really doing it right, is this guy named Ben Gray. He's actually right down the road from me, and he used to be at a lot of conferences like this. He used to present a lot, and he doesn't anymore. And while I was interviewing, I asked him why not. He said, because right now in our district, we're doing all the things that I used to advocate people would do. And I'd rather be here doing them than talking to other people about them somewhere else. You know what I mean? And the beautiful thing about it is they're breaking it all down and they're doing it transparently. So you can go to his website, CCSD 59 in Illinois, and you can see every step along the way. You know what they're doing right now, or what they did last summer, actually, I'm sorry. Last summer, the teachers collectively tore apart the entire curriculum and rebuilt it based on their new vision of what they want for students, the future forward ideas, the 21st century skills, and so on. Every lesson across the entire school district, they read it, and they have the whole thing online. You can take it and you can grab it and you can run with it and you can look genius by taking credit for it when you bring it to your own schools. You know what I mean? And I actually asked him, I said, so could you, somebody else, grab this from you, implement it, would they get the same sorts of results that you're getting in your own school district? And he said, absolutely not. It wouldn't work. And the reason why is, do any of you remember when wikis first came around? You guys are familiar with wikis, right? Any of you create a wiki at some point in your life? Okay, yeah. Some people, listen, they might have been born a little bit later. They might not remember Rick Astley, and they probably don't remember when wikis came around. Okay, I get it. The ideal that a lot of people had was we could have the whole classroom together. Instead of actually just using a traditional textbook, we could have the students invent the textbook. Instead of studying the Revolutionary War, we'll have our students create a course on the Revolutionary War. And in doing so, they will create a great textbook and they will learn a lot. And it will be a wonderful process. And it was. The teachers that did it, the students that created that book, learned a tremendous amount. They owned the learning. They dug deeper. It was phenomenal. And at the end, they had this beautiful textbook that was actually designed not just for their area, not just for their state, but their district, but their school and that teacher. And then the next year, the teacher would take that textbook and try and use it with the next class. And it would be an utter failure. Why? Because it was the journey. The journey was more important than the destination. And the process of creating that book was what was transformative, not the end result. You could take Ben Gray's curriculum and you could implement it in, and it would be good and it would be better, but it wouldn't be transformative. You know what I mean? It wouldn't necessarily move the needle. The process that they went through was not a short process. They actually have it documented in a timeline. They started in 2014. They're just now starting to get some results. 3 years in, almost completing their 4th year, or midway through their 3rd year, 3.5 years, that's when they're first starting to see the results of what they're doing. This is not something you can't change this kind of stuff, this vision, this perspective overnight. And we have to be thinking long-term about it. Dropping the 3D printer into the classroom is not going to move the needle. This is what it winds up taking. We talk a lot about where all these other places where things are better and where things, we talk about Finland. Honest truth, last 3 days, I've had 4 conversations about Finland. I think Finland is doing wonderful things. I think they're having incredible results for the students. I do not think we can take the Finland approach, the Finnish approach to education, and airdrop it into our schools and expect the same results. Why? We're not Finland. We don't have Finnish students. We don't have Finnish parents. We don't have Finnish culture. We don't have Finnish ideals. We have American students and American parents and American ideals. That's not to say we can't come up with our own system and find what's right for us. But we can't just expect us to be able to steal their destination and expect it to work for us without going along every step of that journey. This, we love this little...
Yeah, this is one of the other scenes from Stranger Things that kind of ties together this idea of journey.
Volume. See, you did it too. You turned your volume down.
All right.
I'm just saying, it's not just me.
How much further? I don't know. He's only tell direction, not distance. You really need to learn more about compasses.
Yeah. the compass is going to tell you that you're moving in the right direction. It's not going to tell you exactly how far it's going to be in order to get there, right? I can't tell you that you're going to be able to take any of these ideas and in 1 month your school will be innovative or anything like that. What I can say is if you take some of these ideas and implement them, at least you're moving in that right direction.
Yeah, I mean, yeah.
I want to just point out one thing here. Most of you are technology folks, right? Either technology teachers, director of technology, teachers who are involved in technology, you believe in technology, and so on and so forth, right? Or you're school administrators and you're, what I found ironic is that I have had more conversations about rethinking and about innovation and so on at technology conferences than at school board conferences, at administration conferences, at any other, at curriculum conferences and so on. I go to a lot of conferences. I've seen more conversations about how to change and rethink at technology conferences than anything else. And the reason is, you guys are the folks that are looking forward, that are thinking about this, that are mulling over these ideas. And not only that, more than likely, you've been doing it for a while, right? You are the ones that are on the left-hand side of this. By being here, I promise you, you are on the left-hand side of this curve. What we need to do is make sure that we are actively, not passively, but we are actively trying to bridge that to the other side of the curve and bring people along with us.
And the truth is, we're all running the same race, but you guys have been training for a lot longer. Everyone's going to start at the same place. It's that journey piece that everyone has to go through to wind up getting to that finish line. And just a few points that we'd like to leave you with is, boiling all this stuff down about what makes our classrooms innovative. How do you change your school? It's really simple. Find what we would consider your educational North Star. What is the one thing that is going to be what you aim for your students and for yourself in your classroom?
Yeah, and then talk about it. Talk about it out loud at every opportunity. Talk about your school, your mission, your personal mission, your crusade with your parents, with your colleagues, with your students. Don't let it be a one and done. Don't let it be at this faculty meeting and let it go. This is a conversation that has to happen again and again and again. It has to percolate. It has to bubble up. You have to keep coming back to it. People just have to know you're the crazy one that's on this kind of a mission. You know what I mean? But that's what it's going to take.
And the reality is that you have to make a plan and always keep going towards that. Keep the mission at the heart of what you're doing. Reevaluate everything through the lens of mission. And if things go wrong,
you have to persist. I have another presentation where I talk about the fact that a lot of you've been sort of to that proverbial mountaintop. You've seen where things are going. And sometimes when you talk to other people in your classrooms, if you were to go to your parents and say, I want to use Snapchat with my students as a reflection tool, most of them will look at you like you are crazy. You are. But the reality is it's because you've gone on this journey. You've had this, this experience. You've got a different vision than they do. And it may take time for everyone else to come around. You need to persist and not withdraw. You need to persist and persist vocally and visually.
And the way you do this, is just realize you're not going to go in and change everything in one day, but you really can change one thing every day. So with that, we want to just say thank you for keeping your curiosity door open, and we really appreciate you being here. Thanks again.